It's just past 1300 GMT, 2 p.m. in Morocco, where a powerful earthquake has killed more than 1,000 people and injured hundreds more. Officials are reporting significant and widespread damage across several regions. The number of dead is expected to rise. Well, this was the moment the magnitude 6.8 tremor struck late on Friday evening. As you can see, it sent people running for their lives. The tremor struck some 70 kilometres south of the popular tourist city of Marrakesh. But the shocks were felt as far away as the coastal cities of Rabat, Casablanca and Essaouira. It's the worst disaster Morocco has seen in more than 20 years. Hashem Ahelberra begins our coverage.
Hours after a powerful earthquake struck Morocco, the scale of widespread devastation is now emerging. Flattened houses and streets that resemble a war zone. Marrakesh is the closest major city to the epicenter of the quake. Rescue workers who have worked through the night continue to look for people trapped under the rubble. But there are several areas still out of reach and people are desperate.
Please share this. We need help. We need helicopters and aid. And the roads are closed and we can't drive. We need help to get people from under the rubble.
My parents are ill at home. It is necessary to get help. We cannot continue without water or electricity. The roads are blocked. We only wanted to get our parents out of the house, but we could not.
It began a little past 11 p.m. local time on Friday night, when many Moroccans were out. This is the moment when the earthquake struck, sending panic-stricken people out on the streets. Many others were jolted from their sleep. Piles of debris from flattened houses and collapsed buildings lined what were once residential areas. The desperate search for loved ones began soon after. A video posted online shows a mother trying to reach her children stuck under the rubble. The number of dead is rising.
We dispatched a number of security teams and rescue operation to various affected areas. We urge all citizens to stay calm. The Interior Ministry will update the public later.
The US Geological Survey says the epicenter was in the Atlas Mountains, some 70 kilometers southwest of Marrakesh. There are reports of damage in Marrakesh's Old Town, a UN World Heritage Site. The quake was also felt as far away as the coastal cities of Rabat, Casablanca and Essaouira, and many people spent the night out on the streets.
The house rocked aggressively. Everyone was scared, and I was shocked. I didn't understand what was happening. I thought it was only my house that was moving because it's fragile and old. I heard people screaming. Everyone went out of their houses to the streets, which were full of people and women screaming.
Hospitals in Marrakesh are treating hundreds of injured people. Now, many are worried about the risk of aftershocks in the coming days and weeks. Hashem Ahelberra, Al Jazeera.
Hashem Ahelberra joins us now live on set. And Hashem, the focus now on these particular hours. They are the hours that make the difference between life and death, right?
They are, and this explains why we're getting these numbers now climbing to more than 1,000 victims of the earthquake. We're talking about also dozens of people critically injured.
So these are assumedly people going through the rubble and finding their loved ones, sadly, not alive.
Exactly, and we are yet to get a sense of what happened in Ahelberra, which is the epicenter of the earthquake. This is one of the villages that were massively affected by the earthquake, along with Ijoka, Quirgan, and many other areas in the Atlas Mountains. It will take the government some time to be able to get a complete picture of what happened, and I think this explains why we're getting these numbers further increasing. The authorities are saying that the army has been deployed with specialized units to try to rescue those trapped under the rubble. It's going to be extremely, extremely difficult situation.
I think the WHO was saying that something like 300,000 people could have been impacted by this. Do we have any idea how many of that number might be still trapped under the rubble right now?
You see, this is the thing, because we're talking about villages. To be able to drive to those villages I myself drive to those villages, and it takes me sometimes 7 hours to drive just for 35 kilometers. Very rough terrain, very extremely difficult to get access to. And there are thousands and thousands of local people living in local communities in these desolate mountainous areas. And this is the concern. The concern is how many people are still trapped under the rubble, and how many buildings have been severely compromised because of this earthquake.
And if I can add to that, what happens to the people who've survived this? Now, you and I will remember when we covered the devastating earthquakes in Turkey in February. One of the challenges that we faced, and many people faced in the disaster zone, was basic things like finding water.
This is winter, the beginning of a rainy season in Morocco. The army is saying that it has set up the first makeshift hospital in the area. The challenge will be to set up makeshift tents in those areas or move people to temporary shelters. We have to wait and see the number of people affected in those areas. If we're talking about thousands, then the authorities will definitely have to set up immediate tents in those areas to cope with the growing number of the people displaced because of the earthquake. And this explains why the authorities are appealing on people for calm, saying that they are doing their best to try to cope with the magnitude of this earthquake.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much, Hashem Ahelberra. Well, Martin Mai is Professor of Earth Science and Engineering at King Abdullah University in Saudi Arabia. Joins us from Jeddah. Good to have you with us. So, first of all, take us through how frequent, how prone is this area to earthquakes?
Well, thank you. Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to express my condolences and deep grief to the people of Morocco and all those who have been affected. Listening to the stories and seeing the videos is just disheartening. This area is not unknown to experience earthquakes. It had earthquakes in the 1960s and in the early, let's say, 19th century. They are infrequent, but they do occur. And we, from a scientific point of view, know the earthquake hazard in this region exists, as documented by these previous earthquakes and their damage and fatalities that these earthquakes had created. So it's not entirely unknown or uncommon to experience earthquakes there.
How much of a threat are aftershocks, and for how long are they a threat to people who might be, wondering, can they go back indoors? Can they, if they still have houses left, is it safe for them to go home?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, in fact. In particular, if slightly damaged houses are, experiencing just a little bit additional shaking from aftershocks, they might just fall down at that point. So from seismological, let's say, experience and statistical work, we know that aftershocks of magnitude 5 to 5.5 are likely to occur after this earthquake of magnitude 6.8. So these are strong events, strong quakes that, create substantial shaking. And these aftershocks will continue for several weeks. And so it's not uncommon to see even a magnitude 5 earthquake, I'm speculating, say in a month or two, as the Earth, let's say, responds to the strong shaking it experienced and what we call the changes in stress on the fault that caused this earthquake.
You mentioned the earthquakes of the 60s. Have lessons been learned, as far as you can tell, from those earthquakes in terms of construction codes and how life goes on?
Yeah, excellent question again. I have to admit, I don't really know. I've traveled myself in this area, in this very area that's now affected, a few years ago. And my observation on the buildings I saw, the building style, the classical construction style there is that it follows the traditional pattern. So mud brick, adobe brick buildings, not reinforced, not necessarily concrete. And I think in one of the interviews earlier with one of the victims who said that his house is fragile, I believe this is very much true for many of the village housing and even in the medieval cities like Marrakesh. very densely populated, very densely built, but to standards, that's the traditional architecture mostly. So I don't think, but I don't know for sure, I don't think this is really built according to seismic safe standards.
And looking at it from a seismic perspective, does this earthquake change the risk assessment for the region?
It will. First of all, if now scientists take this information from this earthquake, where precisely it occurred, how it occurred, and also examine what shaking levels were experienced, we can use that information to update or improve what we call the earthquake hazard maps, because they rely critically on information of past events like this one. While we update, well, like the scientific and the engineering community updates these hazard maps, it is actually critical to address the question you asked, namely, how safe are our buildings? Is our building code still sufficient? And if it is sufficient, is it enforced? So there's always this, let me say, human component to natural hazards, that we cannot predict earthquakes, we cannot prevent earthquakes. The only thing we can do is to prepare for earthquakes. And so that's now a subsequent question that needs to be asked.
All right,
Were we
thank you so
prepared
much.
enough?
Yes, let's hope so. Thanks so much for your analysis on that, Martin Mai.